I'll be updating this vintage fantastic merchandise fireplace. I'm antiquing the mirror so it won't reflect a full-size world and adding some faux bricks. I'm starting by using my heat gun to remove these wooden rails. The heat gun softens the bond of the glue and makes them easy to remove. Apply the heat in short bursts, keeping the gun moving so you don't burn the wood. If the piece doesn't pop off right away, apply more heat. It shouldn't take a lot of effort or require any tools. In a previous video, I already used some of these pieces to make Christmas decor, and I'll definitely use all the rest of it. These 4 pieces look just like furniture feet. I will probably use them in my Gryffindor common room when I make the sofa. With all of the pieces removed, I sanded the entire fireplace so the paint will stick. My spray paint got clogged after only 1 coat and started spitting like this, so I switched to this airbrush paint to do the final coats. I bought this to use in an airbrush, but I have terrible airbrush technique and constantly clog my guns, so now I'm just using it with a brush. This paint is very see-through, so you would definitely need some base coats, but I love how it self-levels and has this realistic sheen that looks factory finished. Now I'm transforming this faux brick in this wooden base using some of the cork bricks I made in a previous video. I have 2 options, these rectangular bricks or these bricks with rounded corners. I'll be using the rectangle bricks. I'm applying my bricks with the mortar method, and this can get a little messy, so I'm using some painter's tape to protect the fireplace. I'm making my mortar mixture by adding white glue to spackle. I got this plastic mixing container from some takeout. I'm adding my spackle mixture directly to the surface I'm working on. I'm covering this entire backspace with the mixture. If you are working on a larger area, you might want to do this a section at a time. I'm pressing the bricks directly into the spackle mixture. The fireplace isn't wide enough for 3 full bricks going across, so I cut one in half. The cork is thin and easy to cut. I laid my bricks in a classic staggered brick pattern. I'm using my finger to press the bricks into the mortar as I go. I've linked to the full cork brick tutorial in the comments below if you'd like to see the different styles and methods available. When I got to my final row, I realized I should have started at the bottom. I used my knife to shift all of the bricks downward to close the gap. The spackle and glue mixture was still nice and wet, so this was an easy fix. I covered the entire back and the sides with the bricks. If you'd like a tidier look, you can take a slightly damp brush and brush any spackle off of the surface of the bricks. Before I allow all of this spackle to dry, I'm using my knife to shift the bricks if any of them are crooked or have a weird gap. I'm removing the spackle so it isn't in the way when I add the bricks to the hearth. I will be wrapping my bricks around the hearth, but for now I'm adding the spackle mixture only to the flat part and not to the sides. I lined up a row of bricks on the front to get started. I'm just eyeballing it, but you can measure if you want them to be perfectly centered. I have a full brick in the middle and 1/2 brick on either side. At this point I realized I should have started with the hearth, centered the bricks, and then carried them up the wall. Since I didn't, my back brick is a little off-center. To finish the back row, I cut small slivers at a time until I got the right angle. By this point, it had been about 40 minutes since I made my spackle and glue mixture. It's still nice and wet, so I'm using a Q-tip to scoop it into tiny areas to fill these spaces in with bricks. I cut a small bit at a time to get this brick to fit around this column. It's better to take small cuts and make slight adjustments rather than cut too much and need to cut an entirely new brick. I filled all of these spaces with bricks and did the same on the other side. When I started filming myself covering this edge, I used full-length bricks that were cut to be shorter. But since this is supposed to be the exposed end of full bricks, they're actually supposed to be oriented this way. Start by lining up a full-sized brick with the front so any trimmed bricks are in the back. I did a similar technique across the front using full-length bricks. The thickness of my hearth is shorter than the height of my bricks, so I trimmed a sliver off of each full-length brick. Depending on the thickness of your hearth, you may need to trim your bricks like I did. With all of my bricks laid, I'm using a toothpick to scrape some of the squeezed out mortar from the surface. When there's mortar squeezing out between bricks, it's called an extruded joint. If you like this look, you can press your bricks in further to cause more squeeze out. I prefer a cleaner look for this project, so I removed most of the mortar using my toothpick and then used a damp cloth to clean it off of the surface of the bricks. I did the same thing on the front and the sides. While the spackle mixture was still wet at this stage, I did a once-over to check that the bricks were in a good position before allowing them to dry. I cleaned the spackle off of my tools and off of my little cup so I can reuse it. This brick didn't have enough mortar underneath it, so I added some glue to secure it once everything had dried. I'm disguising the cut ends of the brick where the grout lines are with a little bit of paint. This is totally optional, but I think it makes the brick look more realistic and doesn't stand out so much in photos. You can compare the left side where I've already painted with the right side to see which one you prefer. I used the same painting trick to paint all of the white joints along the bricks on the edges to make them look like solid bricks. I'm using some more of the paint to paint this bit of grout right here where I didn't cut the brick perfectly up against this round column. While I was sanding the piece of furniture for paint, I accidentally scratched the mirror. I used to get discouraged by mistakes like this, but they can also be a good opportunity. I'm using some enamel paint to try out a faux antique look. This particular enamel paint is from Testers and it's oil-based. I only have one mirror, so you'd think I would do some practice runs, but I didn't. With very little forethought or planning, I dotted enamel paint over the surface of the mirror. This thin, streaky layer of paint looked pretty terrible, so I added a lot more paint to completely cover the surface with the enamel. When I'm cleaning oil paint off of my brushes, I like to remove most of the paint using a paper towel and then swirl the brush around some mineral spirits. While cleaning off the brush, I was struck by some sudden inspiration to splatter some mineral spirits over the surface of the still wet enamel paint. I added some larger circular puddles and some smaller splatters across the entire surface. Using a paper towel, I'm dabbing straight down on the surface rather than rubbing it back and forth. The paper towel is lifting away the mineral spirits and taking some of the paint with it. Now the paint is thinner in some spots and thicker in other places. On some antique or old mirrors, there are black spots where all the silver on the back of the glass is completely removed. To mimic this look, I'm using some more oil paint and adding little black dabs across the surface using a toothpick. To soften the unnaturalness of my speckles, I'm adding some more mineral spirits to the places I just added the black. I used my paper towel to dab away the mineral spirits and then added some very thinned out black oil paint across the top for smaller splatters. I allowed it to dry overnight since oil paint takes a little while to dry, and then sealed the entire surface with Diamond Glaze. Do not shake your bottle to avoid air bubbles in your Diamond Glaze coating. I was a little worried about how this water-based product would react with the oil paint beneath it. I was able to easily spread it over the surface without disturbing any of the paint, and it dried perfectly. I coated the mirror to fill in the texture caused by the dabbing to make it look like one smooth piece of glass. The contact paper the mirror is attached to got a bit dirty, so I should have taped this off before I started working on it. The 24 hours it spent on my messy desk made it lose some of its stick, so I'm reinforcing it with some tape. For those of you who don't have oil paints and don't want to deal with the chemicals, you know I've got your back because I tried the same technique using acrylic paints. I dug through my collection of mini mirrors to find some volunteers for the acrylic test. I'm trying it on this fake sticker mirror as well as 3 small glass mirrors. I'm starting by painting each of the mirrors using some silver paint. This is extremely cheap silver acrylic paint. I added a stipple coat to my sticker mirror as well. You can use a splattering technique instead, but I used a spray bottle to add some water to the surface. I did test out rubbing alcohol and the water works better for this water-based paint. I watered down some black acrylic paint and splattered it over the surface of the mirrors. This is where the technique differs a bit. For the enamel painted mirror, I diffused the black paint dots, but for the acrylic, it's best to leave the splattering as the final painting step because the paper towel completely removes the black dots. The acrylic mirrors dried a lot faster since the paint is not oil-based. The texture was a lot more subtle than the enamel-based mirrors, but I still coated all of them with Diamond Glaze. Diamond Glaze is an adhesive, so I removed the tape while it was still wet so it wouldn't be stuck there forever. Much to my surprise, I was able to achieve a very similar look using the acrylic paint. Even the very cheap sticker mirror looks very similar to the real glass pieces. Either method would be a great option to cover up your reflective mirrors or cover cheap sticker mirrors. Half of my posts on Patreon are available to everyone, so please join as a free member or as a paying member for $3 a month. Check out this video next to learn how to make cork bricks.